Dear Seventh-day Adventists, a revival of original Adventism and ancient Christianity presents Escape for Thy Life, a program explaining prophecy. Current affairs. Theological issues. Rights and freedoms. Health issues. Natural disasters. Comparative religion. Pioneer history. Creation versus evolution. Escape for Thy Life. We who are students of prophecy know very well that soon the mark of the beast is to come, and that Christians in America and all over the world will suffer severe persecution as the constitutions of the nations of the world change to be able to persecute Christians. For many years, the U.S. freedom has been whittled away by conspirationalists and by congressmen. These congressmen are part and parcel of the move towards merging America in a brand new world order. They have undermined the U.S. Constitution, and this will adversely affect the entire world. But now, my dear people, a new horrible bill has been recently signed into law by the current President of the United States of America. It has passed in the House, it has passed in the Senate. The President said he might not sign it, but then he did sign it. This law is called the National Defense Authorization Act. And this law is a very horrible piece of legislation. You see, it cuts off, you see, my dear people, it cuts off anyone who have been deemed a terrorist by the Department of Defense from any form of legal justice. Yes, my dear people. This person can be apprehended by the military in the US, on US soil, and anywhere in the world. He can be detained indefinitely without a lawyer, and he can be executed or made to disappear without a trial and without any government information to anyone. And this can happen on US soil or anywhere in the world. Yes, my dear people, such a law like this has been passed in the United States of America. We know that this law will be used against God's people when they preach and against and refuse to comply with the mark of the beast. So we want you to look at these various clips that explain this horrible piece of legislation that has now become law in the United States of America as freedom flies away from the world.
We're shopping and dining over Thanksgiving and maybe watching some football games. Big government Republicans and Democrats were busy shredding the last vestiges of the Constitution. Senators John McCain and Carl Levin want to enact a law that would declare the entire United States of America a battlefield for the military. They're talking about inserting the Army into domestic law enforcement. Senator Lindsey Graham, who supports this bill, says, quote, "The homeland is part of the battlefield, and people can be held without trial, whether an American citizen or not." I guess he hasn't read the Constitution recently.
Finally, after 10 years, the Congress of the United States, through this legislation, is going to make the simple proposition that under the law of war, you can be held as an enemy combatant indefinitely.
In what can only be considered a tragic irony, the U.S. Senate passed out of the final conference committee the controversial National Defense Authorization Act of 2012, coinciding with the 220th anniversary of the ratification of the Bill of Rights. Section 1031 of the National Defense Authorization Act, otherwise known as the NDAA, provides broad authority for the federal government to use the military in domestic operations in order to detain Americans indefinitely and without trial. Such a move not only whitewashes the natural rights of Americans, whereby even publicly criticizing the federal government can now rise to the purposely vague definition of belligerent act. It also sits in direct violation of posse comitatus, an 1878 law forbidding the use of the military at home and against Americans. Here is Congressman Paul's remarks on the bill.
This last week, the U.S. Congress passed a bill which repeals posse comitatus, which means that we have now institutionalized and codified martial law. Right now, the battle against terrorism involves all of us. Everybody in this country is a potential terrorist. And the words that they use in there to bring everybody in as a potential terrorist is any associated forces, which means that if you happen to visit a website, happen to attend a meeting, happen to do one association, you can be accused of being a terrorist, and the bill says you have no right to a lawyer. They've been abusive of this for many years, but now it's been codified. And this president, just about a year ago, announced that some of these bad people, even though they're American citizens, don't deserve even charges, that they can now be assassinated. We should be consciously aware of terrorism and deal with it, but to say that we're at war with the world and we can send a drone missile and send our troops any place we want is very, very dangerous. Endless wars, attack on civil liberties. This Patriot Act is not very patriotic, let me tell you. It's an invasion of your privacy, and I often wonder how many members of Congress would have voted for the Patriot Act if it would have been called the repeal of the Fourth Amendment. Big government is alive and well, but the grassroots are waking up.
As Congressman Paul stated, the bill requires absolutely no supporting evidence to issue the order of detention, instead leaving it up to the whim of the executive branch to act as judge, jury, and in some cases, having already decreed the power to assassinate Americans earlier in the year, executioner. The danger behind allowing any law that includes such arbitrary terms as belligerent act simply cannot be overstated, as the Department of Homeland Security has already published multiple reports labeling those who support the Constitution or protest the Federal Reserve to be domestic belligerents, and thus, in the eyes of the federal government, a threat to national security. Even more disconcerting is the level of pompous disregard elected members of Congress show as they arrogantly eradicate the founding principles of America, trampling upon the very ideals that helped spark the first American Revolution. With Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina recently stating during debate in the Senate, "Please know what will come your way: death, detention, and prosecution. And when I say I want my lawyer, you tell them, shut up. You don't get a lawyer."
Know good and well that someday there could be a government in power that is shipping its citizens off for disagreements. There are laws on the books now that characterize who might be a terrorist. Someone missing fingers on their hands is a suspect, according to the Department of Justice. Someone who has guns, someone who has ammunition that is weatherproofed, someone who has more than 7 days of food in their house can be considered a potential terrorist. If you are suspected by these activities, do you want to have the government have the ability to send you to Guantanamo Bay for indefinite detention? A suspect. We're not talking about someone who has been tried and found guilty. We're talking about someone suspected of activities. But some of the things that make you suspicious of terrorism are having food, having more than 7 days of food, missing fingers on your hand, having ammunition, having weatherproofed ammunition, having several guns at your house. Is that enough? Are you willing to sacrifice your freedom for liberty? I would argue that we should strike these detainee provisions from this bill because we are giving up our liberty. We are giving up the constitutional right to have due process before we're sent to a prison. This is very important. I think this is a constitutional liberty we should not look at and blithely sign away to the executive power or to the military. So I would call for support of the amendment that will strike the provisions on keeping detainees indefinitely, particularly the fact that we could now for the first time send American citizens to prisons abroad. I think that is a grave danger to our constitutional liberty, and I advise a vote to strike these provisions from the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
There is a new part of the Defense Authorization Act which could make it legal for the U.S. to be able to detain anyone that is a U.S. citizen, and it would be at the discretion of the military, and it could be done here in the United States. Now, that was scary and terrible. There's something that is, Well, it's not I guess it's a new interpretation. It's something that we knew about before, but there's further details on it. So, you remember we killed Anwar Awlaki, who was the U.S.-born citizen of this country that happened to be in Yemen. Now, he was a propaganda guy for al-Qaeda. We believe that, we meaning the United States government, believed that he was now had an operational role in al-Qaeda, and hence he was targeted for death, and death he received. So now there were no trials, there was nothing, it was just a determination by the military and the president that he needed to be executed abroad, and he was through a drone strike. Well, CIA counsel Stephen Preston and Pentagon counsel Jay Johnson were talking about that recently, and they wanted to bring more clarity to the issue, and that clarity is disastrous. So when asked, so does that mean anybody can be targeted if they're a U.S. citizen abroad? Their answer was yes. U.S. citizens do not have immunity when they are, quote, at war with the United States. Now, you see the problem already, right? Well, what does that mean? Okay, so guy's got a machine gun and the Taliban's here and we're shooting at one another, and you shoot the guy, everybody gets it, right? And then you find out later that he's a U.S. citizen, or you found out beforehand the guy shooting at you is a U.S. citizen, but you got to stop him from shooting at you, right? Everybody understands that. But this is not that. This is, we have targeted a guy, he's a U.S. citizen. The minute we find him out in the open, we're going to drop a drone strike on his head and execute him, okay? So how do you determine that he's at quote-unquote at war with us? Well, Johnson, who is the Pentagon counsel, said that only the executive branch and not the courts are equipped to make military battlefield targeting decisions about who qualifies as an enemy. That's being reported by the Associated Press. So that means the military can, on its own, decide to execute any U.S. citizen abroad if they have deemed him at war with us. And let's hope they're right. That's not how it's supposed to be in the United States of America. It meant something to be a U.S. citizen. It meant you had rights. And when you have rights, the good guys have rights, and oftentimes the bad guys have rights. Look, we give rights to serial killers in this country. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown who butchered dozens of kids. And we gave him rights. Why? Because as horrible a human being as he was a U.S. citizen. Jeffrey Dahmer, we gave him rights. He ate kids. He killed them, chopped them up, and ate them, and we gave him rights. Why? Because he's a U.S. citizen. It's not because we care about Jeffrey Dahmer. It's not because we want to protect John Wayne Gacy. It's because we're not sure who's guilty until we have the trial. We're trying to protect you. We're trying to protect all of us. That's the point of having rights as U.S. citizens. Under the new regime, and it was true under Bush, and it's now true under Obama, and even more so under Obama, the drone strikes have increased, and he's the first one to kill a U.S. citizen without trial abroad with knowledge beforehand, saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to execute this guy, right? So the new standard is, if you're abroad and you're a U.S. citizen, your rights are gone, okay? They're obliterated. And all there has to be is a secret determination by our military and the White House that you need to be executed, and you're done for. That is horrible. That is not what America is supposed to be all about. I brought up the detention thing earlier, right? It's because, think about the context. In the detention case, they're saying, well, we could, again, the military can decide to give you indefinite detention, and you get one simple military hearing, not even a trial, and then you could be locked up forever. And that you could do inside the U.S. So now that we can execute U.S. citizens abroad without a trial, and we can detain U.S. citizens in the U.S. without a trial, how soon will we transition? First of all, we don't need to transition to anything else. Those two things are horrible, right? And by the way, the detention is not passed yet. It's passed the Senate. It's going to go to the House. Likely will pass the House, but the president says he's going to veto it. But if those things go through, and the executions abroad are already happening, you combine those two things, how quickly will we get to the point where we're executing U.S. citizens here in this country without a trial?
It happened, ladies and gentlemen. President Obama on Saturday, December 31st, 2011, as a little New Year's present to our constitutional republic, signed the National Defense Authorization Act. And he had an accompanying signing statement saying, don't worry, even though it says we can secretly arrest U.S. citizens and throw away the key, we won't be implementing it this way. Of course, he could always change his mind, because here's the big lie. It was President Obama, Senator Carl Levin, of his own party. It was Senator Carl Levin who came out and pointed out, when he was getting the blame for this, that it was President Obama and his lawyers, and he produced the letter, that demanded and said that they would veto the National Defense Authorization Act and hold up the entire military appropriations if they didn't give Obama, the office of the presidency, the power to indefinitely detain U.S. citizens. But it goes further. There's all these creepy clips we've got on Infowars.com from C-SPAN of the authors and sponsors of it. Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator John McCain, Senator Carl Levin, Senator Joe Lieberman, and others saying, yeah, we're going to arrest citizens. Yeah, we're going to torture you. We want you to be afraid. You bet this is for U.S. citizens. That was back when CNN and other mainstream media deceivers were saying, it doesn't affect citizens, it doesn't affect citizens. That was so we couldn't get any opposition to it in the first month of it being developed. They would just deny over and over again that it affected citizens. But Ron Paul, myself, and others brought forward the fact that the subsections did say that, and we pointed out the video clips of the authors of it admitting it. But just this last week, CBS News, ABC News, the New York Times, hundreds of publications and TV channels came out and said Ron Paul is crazy. He believes that the NDAA affects citizens and allows the military to operate domestically. Well, the ACLU's done the analysis. It's a worldwide declaration of the entire planet as a battlefield, a worldwide declaration of war by the corporate interests that run our military and our government that have hijacked it. It allows the torture, secret arrest, indefinite detention forever of U.S. citizens. That's all on record. And there's been deception after deception. Remember, a month and a half ago, oh, it doesn't affect citizens. That big controversy. Then the senators that authored it said, you bet it does. I'm going to show you where you can find those clips here in just a moment. Then Obama, lies within lies, came out and said, I'm opposing this bill. And then it freaked everybody out when he said, no, now I'm going to sign it. And it freaked people out even more when the senators came out, all of them, and said, don't blame us. We were told by the White House, do this or I won't sign it. Now Obama, in his signing statement, you can just type NDAA into Google News, you'll find it. It's on whitehouse.gov. He said today in his signing statement that he doesn't like the indefinite detention part for citizens, but the Senate wanted it, so that's what they got, but that he's going to disregard that because he didn't want to hold up military appropriations, when he was the one that said he would hold it up if they didn't. I mean, this is why the deception is so hard to pierce for the general public, who kind of just halfway pays attention to the headlines. And the media propaganda is targeting those of you out there that really don't pay attention. Remember the Patriot Act? They said that wouldn't affect citizens and was only for terrorists. Now they use it in family violence cases and cases of people dealing marijuana thousands of times per state per year. Remember how they weren't going to spy on us without warrants. Now they just admit they are. Now the TSA's announced they're going to be at checkpoints all over the country, and they're actually running the checkpoints as we speak. This is a total takeover by criminal interests that have seized our nation, and they need to put this police state grid in place to maintain and protect themselves from the public. The criminals need a tyranny in place so they can continue to get away with all the crimes they've committed.